Hello.
Hi all.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. Hey, Nabil, I'm sorry, we are not hearing you.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Good call. I was on mute. So welcome everyone to our ninth town hall. A lot to get through, a lot of changes, a lot of progress. To start off with, we'll have an update from Jarrad about kind of organizational structure and like the future of status. So I'll let him take it away.
Cool, thanks. Everyone can hear me all right?
Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, cool. So basically, I wanted to talk about sort of decentralized organizations, why they're important, why it's important to status, and throw out some ideas there. And if they're interesting to you, I'd love to talk to you, and maybe we can work together to make this vision come to life. And it's really about this sort of mentality of decentralization that we need people who want to join on and participate in. But they're not just my ideas. These are ideas that very prominent people and many other people have been looking at and researching. So I tried to compile a list of books, which will be at the end for you to peruse, and we're happy to get them for you if you want to give them a read. But if you had to read one of them, I think one of them is great to start with is the starfish and the spider. And the analogy is essentially between centralized organizations versus decentralized organizations, and why at face value, they often appear to look the same. However, their sort of face value similarities is kind of where it ends. And the example that they give is a spider. It has 8 legs, it has a body. Maybe you can chop off one of the legs or two and it can still operate, but is somewhat dysfunctional. But then if you cut off the head, the entire thing stops working. Whereas if you have a starfish, if you cut it in half, all of a sudden you have 2 starfish to deal with. And that's largely because a lot of its core organs are replicated throughout the organism. And of course, we're an organization, not an animal. Having that said, organizations are something like a superorganism made up of humans. So that's kind of the sort of underlying analogy there. I am recruiting status catalysts. So if that is interesting to you, we're going to do like training. We're going to find out different ways that we can start engaging and growing the community around status. So if that is interesting to you, please reach out and let's make that happen. Next slide, please. So we've grown tremendously over the past 8 months. We've had a whole bunch of new people come in, all incredibly talented and experts at their jobs. And so much so that we've been growing so quickly that it's very hard to kind of see some of these decentralized organization mentality and culture within status, which I'll get to in a moment. But I think one of the most important things to realize or to enhance your skill set is to realize that where we're actually building the value doesn't necessarily rely in the software that we're creating. I think it's quite common in other organizations when you're working on a particular product, you focus on this and you try to make the best product as possible. And then you rely on marketing to push this out to consumers or users. Now we have this opportunity to work with this bleeding edge, amazing technology. We're at the forefront of potentially how civilizations can be radically transformed, and blockchain technology could be the backbone of societies. And it certainly looks like it's the best sort of technology to do this sort of stuff. But with this, it does come with a shift in mindset or in thinking. And that's really about this network thinking, whereas no longer the value is entirely within the product and then you're giving this to users, but instead it's within the social relationships that we form around it. So you can imagine Status, the software, is actually more an expression or a catalyst of this mission that we're all on together. But the real value lies in our relationships with each other and with the greater people around this who are also participating in Ethereum. For example, the Ethereum network had actually given rise to the Status network. Without Ethereum, we wouldn't exist. And without Bitcoin, Ethereum probably wouldn't exist either. So there's all these sort of inter-organizational communities out there, and that is where the real value really lies. So it's great to take our expertise in how we create these products. We certainly need to learn how to enhance that to start being more inclusive and bringing more people in. Next slide. Yeah. And so, like, if you have to remember just one thing out of all of this, it's a simple matter of changing one word. Instead of building for somebody, you're building with them. Everyone we interact with, we talk to, is a potential contributor to Status. It's not like they are just a user of Status or an SNT holder. Our job is really to take these SNT holders and bring them all the way to being active contributors. And this isn't just within software. This can be within marketing, within design, with evangelism. Anywhere we can get an extra pair of hands to be involved, we can strengthen the network, we can strengthen the Ethereum network, and we can all rise together. And like I said, some of this may not be apparent to many of the contributors that have come on board recently, since we have grown so quickly. But there's been a couple of other events along the way that I think is worth sharing with you, just so you know. A lot of these decentralized organization ideas were there from day one. In fact, we focused on this entirely because we didn't have the resources that we have today. We were 7 people, but we managed to include the community around us, get their support, and we managed to get to a point of roughly about 3,000 people within our Slack. And I wish you guys could have seen it because we had, out of those 3,000, there's probably 50 to 100 daily active users within our chat channels. And the conversations were incredibly rich. We're having amazing discussions, different feature requests or different ideas. And it was just full of passionate people. Shortly after that, we did end up gearing up for the token sale. And our community ballooned up to around 16,000 people during that time. And this is all because of the network effects that was from this impassioned community. Unfortunately, our community wasn't big enough to handle that amount of interest, and it got somewhat diluted during that process. And because it got so large, we ended up attracting a bunch of scammers and phishers and this sort of thing. There was no moderation tools in Slack. So any remnants of that kind of got blown away. And then the community got somewhat split. We put everyone into riots, and we built up essentially a bit of a wall with Slack, unfortunately. This is something we need to get away from in the future, but it was certainly necessary at that time just to find some semblance of sanity. And this is very different from the sort of some of the conversations that we see today. You know, like we have a lot of consumer-based or investor-based conversations, and they're valid people, but we need to figure out how we can take them from that point in mindset and how we can actually bring them in to be a participant in what we're doing. Also, a lot of the things we're talking about, they are actually inherently scalable. In fact, they are more so than what you would do within a centralized organization, but there are some inefficiencies involved. So this might all sound like great ideas, but maybe they're a little too pie in the sky. Maybe you don't see the actual relevance or how to bring this back to reality. And I think that's a perfectly valid position to take. It's very, very hard to look at these sort of organizational designs and see how they're different or how things could be done in a different way. Particularly when we already have a certain worldview and we've been working in a particular fashion that works quite well. But there is actually some fundamental reasons why we need to do this in Status's organization. And I think the biggest one is this concept of organizational sustainability. We are a peer-to-peer application. Our customers, or the people who are generating the most interest in Status, are ones that want to use communications and the ability to coordinate in essentially hostile environments. Things like programmable public blockchains are perfectly suited for hostile environments. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean the independent activists of Catalan, for example, are facing the Spanish state, and they need a means of creating a new society on top of a blockchain. They need a means of communicating with each other. They need a separate mesh network, a separate infrastructure, and they need applications that actually connect to a peer-to-peer so they can't be unencumbered or they can't be overruled. Some other interests come from Rojava, which is a democratic, democratic confederacy out in Syria. And they have the same issues. In fact, they're getting bombed by Turkey right now. And of course, these are extreme examples, but what they do bring up is how, it does bring up the question on how Status as legal entities could potentially be attacked. Just recently, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, we saw the attack on Telegram. And that was largely on the underlying infrastructure because that's easy and cheap to attack. Us being a peer-to-peer application, we raise those costs to do that substantially. And so another attack vector is the bootstrap legal entity that we're currently working with. That could be taken down, and we need the Status organization to be able to survive its legal entities being attacked, and for this software to continue. And this brings up this idea of the decentralized autonomous organization. Now, or in short, a DAO. Now, what is a DAO? Well, a DAO is essentially a set of smart contracts that are on top of a programmable blockchain like Ethereum that allow us to socially coordinate. We're talking about things like voting systems, new ways of allocating funds, and doing governance in general. And ultimately, this is our goal. We want to ascend into the blockchain, essentially, and dissolve any aspect of legal entities that except for what's the bare minimum. And this will actually allow us to do something that hasn't really been able to be done before, but something like what's called like a hybrid organization. And this is also in the Starfish and Spider, where we try and take some of the efficiencies of a centralized organization while also maintaining a large decentralized aspect of it. And so this is one of the core reasons, and I hope that's pretty clear. Yeah. The other one is open source is actually our ultimate competitive advantage. And I don't think there's actually many open source projects that really push this. It's not about putting your code out there and letting it being publicly viewed on its own. I think this is a great first step, but there's so much more to that. We can actually be building a community around open source software that actually has the end goal to build it out. There's a certain level of trust that you get just by putting it out in open source. It's a whole other level to start actually cultivating people to come around and actually work on it, around it. But we can actually take this a step further, where it's not just about working on the code or itself, on the client itself, but we actually can open source all the things. We can open source the way we do marketing, we can do the design, and these are very new concepts. I don't think there's any real sort of models or templates that we can really borrow from. So we have to do some experimenting here, because if we do this, then we build the strongest community, we build the strongest decentralized organization, the strongest social network around Status. Status no longer becomes the software, it becomes this network. And more importantly, you get very impassioned people doing this. When you start moving this idea to the people and the relationships that are around you, you find and you give them a mission or give them or they see some meaning in the work themselves, then you can be self-directed, you can have purpose, you can trust them, you don't need to tell them necessarily what to do. Of course, if we're trying to meet goals or deadlines, that can become a different story, but as long as we voluntarily accept that, then that's okay. And I think that's really, really different because in some other organizations, at least where I've worked as a developer, it hasn't exactly been the most joyful experience. But when working on status, particularly, I mean, maybe this is a scaling issue, we're not sure, but like some in the early days, like it was really, really fruitful to have those kinds of discussions. And I really want to get back to that so I can at least show you what that might be like. So this is directly lifted from the book. I think you can find it in the Starfish and Spider Wikipedia summary. But these are some of the traits of catalysts. You have some genuine interest in others. You form lots of loose connections rather than a small number of close connections. This allows you to distribute your influence throughout the network, having more skill with social mapping, a genuine desire to actually help people that you meet. And then also becoming somewhat of a leader, giving people the tools to not only help themselves, but also help other people. There's emotional intelligence, there's trust in others, obviously inspiration, tolerance for ambiguity. I think this is kind of important. Sometimes we do have to let go a little bit, and that's somewhat scary sometimes. Of course, this is balanced against, again, trying to reach certain goals that we've set for ourselves, as long as we set them together and it's been a joint or by consensus. And that's a very important distinction, even though it's kind of subtle. Yeah, and so, again, having this hands-off approach and ability to get let go, they're all kind of very similar, those last three. And these are 10 rules that the book outlines for the organization. This idea of diseconomies of scale. You actually don't need too many people in the core organization. You need a bit of structure, but really they are coordinators or connectors, and they're bringing people together. So you're kind of externalizing a lot of your processes, and you're trying to embed a lot of what we're doing in the people around you. And they might not necessarily be considered core contributors, even though they're very much part of status. You're building out the network effect. This is incredibly powerful, and it's even more so because we have a token. We can actually tokenize our network, and I don't think any of us have really seen this. We saw a glimpse of this when we had the Status Genesis tokens. We're giving this out. It was absolutely phenomenal to see, and it's exactly what took us from 3,000 contributors or community members to 16,000 people. And when you see this, it's going to be mind-blowing. I really can't wait to show it to you. I got this power of chaos. We need to learn how to thrive in this sort of somewhat drunken style of organization. It's somewhat unorganized to the lay eye, but there is actually some structure underneath it. The knowledge is in the edge, like the people who are developing, the people who are working, doing the marketing, they're the ones who know these sort of things. They actually have a lot of ideas, and they understand things. If you have some hierarchies of managers, they might actually be divorced from the front lines. So they don't necessarily have all the knowledge. And it's important to realize this and take advantage of it. Just realize that everyone, if you can build a structure out like this, and you can build a way of bringing people into it, you'll find that people actually want to contribute. Now, they might not be the best people, but the fact that they can, that's permissionless and trustless to do, and we give them the tools to do that, it's 10 times, if not 100 times better than just having a loyal customer. This is a real evangelist. This is a real believer. They're essentially activists. Again, this Hydra response, something like a starfish, If we're attacked, the organization can perpetuate itself because it's now multiple different cells or groups of people achieving the same goal, even though the central entity has been removed. We need to inspire people to action. We need to inspire people to work on the organization. Really the binding force or the glue are our values and our ideology. Now that hasn't really been set in stone. Johnny, Steph, Ali are all working together to make this happen, and they're doing a fantastic job. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. The other thing is measuring and monitoring and managing it. And this is what Nabil does a great job of and is working on as well, is how can, particularly with the OKRs, is how can we take this chaos and tame it a little bit and get some sort of feedback on what's actually happening around us. And again, this flatten or be flattened. The flatter we are in terms of our organizational structure, the more resilient we are. So I mentioned this idea of values and ideology. You may not be aware of, but there has been this whole talk of governance for Ethereum itself, trying to move out a lot of decision-making away from the foundation, formalizing some of the EIP processes, but more importantly, talking about how we can govern ourselves in a decentralized way. My personal, I think the structures and process around that and the ideas that are coming out of that are great. But I think personally, I think there's a more fundamental layer to this that resides in social norms, traditions, and customs. So I'm currently working on how to contributing to this by talking to some of the most prominent people in the Ethereum community and identifying their values and what they think makes a great Ethereum citizen. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of overlap here, even though they might not be exactly the same as Status's values. Anyway, that's it from me. Again, if becoming a catalyst or working on this sort of stuff interests you, please message me. We're going to do training on this. We're going to build this out and treat this really seriously. We're going to be working towards this decentralized autonomous organization. In fact, Status Open Bounty was kind of like a precursor or playing this on paper. And all of these books here, I think will give you a really good idea of where I'm coming from or where these ideas rely. And they can articulate it way better than I can. But definitely start with the Starfish and the Spider. And the Ethereum Foundation is actually pushing that Radical Markets book as well. I actually haven't had a chance to read that yet to its entirety, but definitely give them those two at least a check out, and we'll definitely get them for you. That's it from me. Thanks.
Sweet, not quite it. So I thought it probably makes sense to do a quick QA on this topic before we move on. So maybe we spend 5 minutes or so before we go into the usual updates. If people have questions, either on Zoom or on Slack, if we want to do it over text or audio, yeah, rather than doing it at the end when people have lost context. So any thoughts, any questions, any comments? I'll give it another 30 seconds, otherwise we can move on. Okay, all right, we'll leave QA as well at the end, but just in case people have further thoughts, at least it's super interesting to hear that and to think about what it was like at day one, back when there was 7 people and a huge community who were all engaging. So I think, and every single function I think can relate to how to change or evolve further towards being more open and more decentralized. So we have one question from Oscar: where can we talk more about this at Slack and Riot? Can we have a dedicated channel for this?
Yeah, I actually did. There's a hashtag Catalyst. Join it if you're interested. I actually put it in the slide as a very last minute thing, but I don't think it refreshed in time. Well, apologies for that.
There you go. All right. Cool. So changing gears back to our regular scheduled program. So we have, in the past 2 weeks, we've had 3 people who've joined us as core contributors on the team. Sean, who's heading up our engagement work, he'll be spending a lot of time thinking about this evangelism part and helping to engage the community further. We have Barry, who's a smart contract developer, who's joined us recently, and Kerry, whose first aid is today, who's going to be helping on the people ops side in a very working very closely with Steph. We have a ton of roles open. We've got like 6 design roles, I think 5 marketing roles, just a lot of people we're looking to come and boost. And at the same time, following on from what Jarrad spoke about, how can we fill a lot of these gaps by using Open Bounty or by engaging our community and getting more people involved. Marketing update, Johnny.
Cool, thanks, Bill. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on right now. One of the main things we're working on is the State of Us campaign, really designed to encourage active participation. So we're working closely with Chad and everyone from the product teams to just effectively communicate the state of the product and how we can, encourage people to get in and test and use it as much as possible. We're using the brand platform State of Us really as an all-encompassing campaign platform, just to really, encourage people to get out and become part of this community that we're building. Some of the activations, some of the initiatives we're launching as part of this is a podcast series. Andy's recorded a couple, and those are coming out really nice. We're working on a 60-second video, really inspirational piece explaining what we're doing and how people can get involved. And a lot of information. So we're creating an infographic on how to contribute. There's so many ways people can get involved, whether it's through development, content, conversation moderation in Riot or wherever it is. So we just want to effectively communicate the various ways people can get involved. Hutch is planning out another community competition and then a series of competitions. So stay tuned for those. They're really exciting. And then finally, onboarding flows via email and via social. So, people know exactly how to use the product and can get involved and ask questions effectively. And then finally, we'll be running a paid pilot in the background. And then, so we had a marketing summit, a small marketing summit in New York. Sean and Ali came to New York to plan out the next few months. And really what we noticed was, and tying back into what Jarrad was just speaking about, is how can we effectively open this up and open up the process for campaign creation, community involvement, and essentially evangelism. So we came up with a few things. One of them is a campaign tiering system, a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3, where we can identify the levers we can pull, the resources we need, and how to engage the community in each one of those campaigns. So we're documenting that now. So stay tuned for a document on that so you can see exactly what happened. And the other thing we did was we identified some quote unquote playbooks that we can use as tools to try and open this up to everyone. So anyone can get involved, right? So we can document how to host an event. So it doesn't, there is no single point of failure, central point of contact that has to organize that. Anyone essentially can do it. A community event toolkit. So making assets, resources, information available to anyone. And then the same thing for tech talks. So we've had this really awesome series of technical conversations. But right now, just to get the ball rolling, there's been 1 or 2 people that have been organizing it. We want to open this up, so we're putting together a playbook so anyone can then go ahead and do that. And then we'll be playing with these quite a bit over the course of the next few months, working with everyone, working with Jarrad to figure out how we can effectively just open up the process and gather feedback early on and get to a DAO as soon as possible. So we're documenting this, so stay tuned for that. Moving over, there's a ton of content in the works, which is great. We've got a series of tech talks. Andrea, Igor, Jarrad have given great ones. Frank will be speaking this Friday. And Alex is working with us to write up blog posts to accompany those, which is fantastic. Andy's writing a series of more inspirational, why decentralization content to appeal to everyone, not just the highly technical audience. We're working with the Ethereum Community Fund, the ECF, on a blog post about the various funds in the ecosystem and how Status and the ECF fit into that. We'll be working with Jacek and the NIM team to just update the community on the work that they're doing and really publicize it because it's awesome work. And then finally, there's a series of web updates. So we're currently performing a site audit. We're going to be putting together a sitemap and some wireframes, just because the website at this point has grown into something bigger than I think we all expected it to, with the inclusion of projects, Andre's design site, which is great. So we just want to basically clean it up and make it much more approachable for everyone. Finally, there's a ton of events going on, which is great. ETH Buenos Aires, the hackathon in BA, is happening this weekend. So Eduardo, Andy, Richard, Ricardo, and I think that's it. We'll all be in Buenos Aires working with up to 500 developers down there. Jacek has been organizing an Ethereum client meetup. Stay tuned for more details on that. It's a really exciting initiative. ETH Berlin is happening September 7th, so we'll be involved in that one. And we're looking to really have a strong presence there. So stay tuned for more details. And if you have ideas or want to be at Berlin, ping me separately or in Slack, and we can organize some campaign around that. And then we're going to be organizing a status hackathon. The details around that are still being finalized, but it's really exciting, and hopefully as many of us can be involved, and as many of the community members can be involved. So stay tuned. And then finally, DevCon is end of October, early November, and we'll definitely be there. So stay tuned for details on that one as well. Once again, this is all early days. And then finally, an update on status projects. Working with Yuri and his team, those guys are moving extremely fast, and it's incredible. So we're just trying to support them in any way we can, gearing up for 3.1. And then what? I can't see that last one.
S-Prize.
S-Prize, yeah. So Jarrad, you kicked off the initiative S-Prize or Crypto Life Prize. The naming is still TBD, but we're putting together requirements documents for that now. And we'll be working with Jarrad and team, and really would love feedback from everyone on how we can really kick this off. Just need to identify the initial requirements. And that is an initiative to really encourage development and promotion of the decentralized ecosystem through DApp development, through pretty much anything. We want to essentially recreate these very centralized services using Ethereum. So stay tuned for more details on that. It's going to be really exciting. Next slide. So we hit 100,000 Twitter followers. We typically we're not one for vanity metrics, and this is a vanity metric, but I just wanted to call this out because it is a pretty big milestone, and it shows the growth that we've seen over the course of the past few months. And I just want to say this is from the work that everyone does, from the status core contributors to the community members. Thanks to everyone. It makes the marketing job easier. And while we do want to avoid these types of metrics, and obviously there are a ton of people who are in it for various reasons, we have seen a shift towards that more, I guess, kind of like the early days that Jarrad was talking about, where people were genuinely interested in the project and wanted to get involved. And, so thanks to everyone who's in Riot and is kind of making a shift back towards that mentality. And we'll be working with everyone to really foster that and encourage active contribution. So thanks to everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Johnny.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. We're mid-May. So we are halfway through Q2 OKRs. There's been a lot of progress on some of our core OKRs, specifically around message reliability. So that's really awesome to see. I don't want to go into too much detail. So if teams specifically want to jump in and measure how they've gone so far in Q2, go ahead and do it. Create like a mid OKR check-in, and then in about a month's time, we'll start and see what Q3 looks like. Hopefully that will be a good transition into potentially changing some of our priorities. And we'll figure out how to do that in a decentralized way. So we won't be able to dot vote on Post-its, but we'll figure out how to do something similar. All right, Oscar wants to chat about beta.
Cool. So I just want to talk briefly about the beta so far. It's really cool to see everyone coming together these last few weeks and really focusing on the critical path. And I think we've seen a kind of a big difference in mindset and everyone working towards the same goal and sort of thinking in terms of their swarms being pre-beta or post-beta. To do this, we have had to do some trade-offs, some concessions. So our nodes are still a single point of failure. If our cluster goes down, users can't chat with each other. We still lack proper incentive mechanisms around identity, spam management. We're still hosting all the mail servers ourselves. We have seen partial team centralization. We don't have perfect forward secrecy. We don't support group chat. We don't use on-device node by default. We still have issues with performance and so on. But all that said, it's important to remember that the beta is just a stepping stone. And I include this quote by Paul Graham on shipping software and sort of highlight the importance of getting something in front of users that they can actually use. In this case, this means having a version of the app where our users can transact on mainnet, because it will tell us a lot once we have actually real users who use it on a daily basis and inform what we build. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges with running sort of distributed organization is that there's a lot of implicit context. And as Jarrad mentioned, a lot of the context around decisions are sort of at the edges. So to help with this, we're trying to document decisions. And this is something called architecture decision records. And the idea is essentially that you capture the context, decision, and consequences. And in our case, we're capturing it in just a public Git repository. So it's a form of open decision that's part of the public record, and it helps to spread knowledge. And you can refer back to it later. So some examples of decisions that we made and documented for the beta. One is around sort of the gef node. We are relying on upstream for beta, but you can enable a custom one if you're on your own. After the beta, we'll work towards getting ULC MVP as an option into app as soon as possible, and possibly also work on improving less at the same time. We're disabling group chat for the beta. It's simply too buggy right now, and instead of focusing on one-on-one and public chat. We're using a new discovery version 5 protocol, which allows us to discover new peers from the app and also scale peers in the cluster independently. And we've seen some really cool stuff with wallet compatibility. So we changed the key generation to be compatible with other wallets. So if you have a wallet in MetaMask, you can use it in status. The only thing is to be careful with upgrades if you have an old wallet, but this is documented with a nice guide as well. And if you click on these links, you can see more on the context and so on. Yeah. Going beyond the beta, because it's easy to sort of, we have a short-term goal, but sort of maybe losing sight a bit of what we're trying to do here in terms of all the concessions I mentioned before. So I want to talk a bit about sort of building from first principles, and as opposed to giving some kind of imperfect answers that would just be wrong, instead posing some kind of questions that might help to generate some ideas. So how can we support and enable freedom of speech, secure and private messaging, secure and private transactions? How can we build an open and decentralized systems that are properly incentivized and resistant to bad actors? How can we encourage users as stakeholders and a thriving ecosystem of contributors? And some example of sort of litmus tests we can ask ourselves. So if all our servers disappeared tomorrow, how could status still operate? What about if all core contributors here, if we disappeared, could status still operate? From a user's point of view, would Snowden or a future whistleblower use status? Why or why not? how can we get 50% or even 80% of people at a conference like DevCon to use status daily? What type of utility would we have to provide for that to happen? What would it take for a user with, say, $1 million or more in F to trust status as their primary wallet? So those are some sort of seed questions. And with that, we'll go into swarm updates, starting with core swarms and Rachel, who will talk a bit about the beta timeline.
Yep, cool. I'll just give a quick update on the dates here. So our goal for this week is to release version 9.19. We had tried to release last week, but ran into a few blockers. We seem to be on target for this week, and that is to include the much anticipated option of mainnet. Because of the timing and the fact that it is now the end of May, 0.9.19 will also be tested for a beta candidate. This slide pretty accurately reflects all of the work that individual teams and swarms have been making across chat, DApps, and wallet. So I'll let each team give an update on their progress.
Great. Let's start with infrastructure and tooling. Jakub, did you want to give an update? Or anyone else?
All right, yeah, I can give a brief one. So we've seen, so what we're doing is essentially rebuilding our cluster because it's been a bit janky. So essentially the goals are around high availability and being able to do dynamic scaling, and also making sure we have sort of monitoring and logging and a lot of things that are currently missing. Some things that have happened is that we're setting up sort of basic tooling for this. So Terraform for deploying hosts, console for dynamic hosted inventory, so we can push up a lot of Whisper nodes and so on. Ansible for management configuration, and using Docker for hosting most services. And also some additional things around how we do deal with credentials. Future improvements that are on the way is around monitoring and logging, dashboards, and also better authentication mechanisms.
Cool. 167 around automated testing. I think there's a bunch of awesome things here. Anton?
Yes. Hi all. So basically we reached the coverage of 80% automated tests for nightly test suite. And we've introduced the new way of testing nightly builds. It works pretty great. Basically, the most work is done by automated tests, and like 20, even less, like 15% of tests are done manually by tester. But it doesn't mean that we are not testing manually. It means that we are focusing on different tricky scenarios, flows which are not automated and which were not found yet. So it gives us a lot of time and effort for doing investigation to find all possible scenarios which can crash stack. Our future goals is to increase coverage. First of all, we are going to add separate tests for message reliability, since it's our P0. And also we are going to cover all critical regression issues which happens at least twice in app, so bugs which are reproduced from time to time. And we are going to switch the extended test suite to run against each PR and also to run against release branches. Also, we are going to decrease execution time. Right now it takes 40 minutes or maybe an hour. It's due to rerunning a test, but instead of rerunning a test, in our tests we are using several devices, several sessions. And for example, in group chat, when we are using 3-4 devices communicating with each other, one can crash. And we are not going to rerun whole test with all devices. We're just going to restart the session. Also, we are going to investigate on possibility to provide public test layer reports, which can be seen on next screen for each PR, because it's much better to understand what is going on than just to read plain text comments. And lessons learned, it's about rerunning tests. It takes too much time for rerunning the test instead of restarting the session. So we are going to focus on session restarting in order to bypass the issue. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Anton. Adam.
Yep. Hello. So yeah, we did like huge progress recently, and the main point is that Discover version 5 is available for all networks. And right now we are mostly, like for the past 2 weeks, we're mostly working on improving the experience. So for example, we created a custom boot node, which handles short-lived peers better, and it's more suited for our way of using the Discover protocol. There's also signal support from the status go to status react. We have also improved the P2P server for different conditions. And we in the next weeks we are still gonna tweak this Discover protocol and also the peer-to-peer server. But like the overall experience is very good. It's working reliably and in a way that we wanted. So yeah, it's a huge win. We just need to work on it a bit more. So yeah, that's it.
Oh, and mainnet 58.
And mainnet, yep. So 2 weeks ago, we had this final report readout with Deja Vu security, and they did not find new issues in the last 2 weeks for the readout. So yeah, we also took a look at their recommendation observation. They had really good points that are not necessarily like the security issues right now, but they may be in the future. So we transferred them to issues security label in both the status go and status react repositories. Also, we did some mail server security improvements, like basic ones, but pretty important for the beta. And yeah, there are a few outstanding issues, but probably we will move them to post-beta work. They are mostly about history of the chats, so like removing, cleaning it up, and like having more control over the history of your chats. And I just can add to that we have also like this risk matrix effort that's going on, and we are trying to not only figure out the technical issues from the security point of view, but also from like the UI, UX, and also like the scamming issues, how we can prevent it, and so on and so forth. So we anticipate that there's going to be a little more issues, and we just need to figure out a good strategy how to handle them. But yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Adam. Mobile app overall performance, Igor.
Yeah. Hi. Well, it's essentially the energy efficient swarm became some kind of overall performance of the app swarm. So we did quite a good progress last week. We finally got in a batching of the incoming messages. So when you get a lot of messages almost at the same time, like from the mail server, they should be rendered and delivered much more quickly. There are a few PRs that are very close to being merged. That's one is the faster message ordering algorithm that essentially helps every time. Because Whisper itself, it doesn't have any order in it, so we receive Whisper envelopes in like any order, so we need to reorder them to keep like conversation in normal. So then, we used to have one algorithm, but its performance was degrading quite quickly with the number of messages received. So we improved it quite a bit. And also one more thing is that we also did an envelope deduplication on the Go side. So essentially, when you receive the same envelope content, then we just ignore and don't even send them to the React side. That it helps with like performance and especially responsiveness of the app, because the thread that works with the UI events is less busy. So for the future Go, we need to recheck the performance again. And we also need to take a look at the animations. We already, like today we had a call where we decided that we start with switching them off in the chat room. until we can implement the performance version of them, because they hit us a lot. And that was essentially the lesson learned. So as soon as we fix the issues with when we receive messages and we can receive them efficiently and quick, then the other bottleneck is the animations, when it fits the queue, and yeah, essentially doesn't improve as much as we wanted to. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Igor. All right, jumping into chat specifically, Pedro.
Yeah. So the last 2 weeks, we fixed a bunch of issues that affected the message delivery reliability. Stuff like there was a problem with time drift when a device drifted for more than 20 seconds regarding the official time. Then it would be kicked off as a peer. So there was some work to measure the time drift regarding the NTP service and adjust to that. There were also some missing messages on restored accounts, so we fixed that. For the future goals, next 2 weeks, we'll be addressing all the remaining blockers for beta, specifically the blocking that were subject now in Russia. So Andrei is working on that. There's also the mail server capacity improvements, so that we have multiple mail servers and people get distributed across those mail servers, and we don't overload a single one. And of course, we will be integrating the performance improvements mentioned in the last slide about message deduplication, which will help improve the general usability of the app. Yeah, that's it. The lessons so far is just that measuring reliability in this distributed environment is hard, since you don't have any server infrastructure to basically serve as an anchoring point for the measurements. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Wallet and account related things. Andrea, awesome work.
I think Andrea's unfortunately offline, but I can take this briefly. So yeah, some really cool work by Andrea and a bunch of other people around wallet compatibility. So making sure that you can import and export accounts between different wallet sort of implementations. It's been merged last week or something like this. And goals right now is around sort of testing and code audit and making sure everything works well. Lessons learned so far. Very small change in the code can make the wallet compatible with all existing wallet software, which is really cool if you have a bunch of SMT or F in a different app, and you can just import it into status. So for everyone listening, if you have some SMT in MetaMask or whatever, as soon as mainnet is out, just plug it in status and you got it on your phone. Next.
Cool. Gordon?
Yeah, hi everyone. On the wallet improvements side, the major update is that now we have a unified workflow, unified payment workflow between chat and wallet. That means that you'll get the same user experience, more or less, whether you go to chat and then tap send, or you go to wallet and use wallet's send command. So it doesn't sound like a big deal, but that has been a major blocker for an actually useful feature that's being able to send request tokens from chat. So that's also our immediate future goal, to enable tokens being sent or requested or sent back directly from the chat, like /send SNT20, tap enter. The lesson learned so far is that we really need an internal API, a clear internal API, or in other words, we need good support for extensions, because some things that sound trivial, like just sending a multimedia message about the payment in the chat without, an actual chat command, an actual send command, it's exceedingly difficult at the moment. There's too many coupled things, so we need some internal decoupling, some componentization componentization. So, which is, you know, another thing we need to look at doing. So yeah, long story short, we now have the same workflow for chat and wallet send, and the next thing is enabling tokens in chat send command. That's it, more or less. In other updates, our design/UX team is working on a new user experience based on UXR sessions, but that's post beta, so you'll hear more about it after the beta.
Okay. Sweet. All right. DApps and developers.
Yep, I will give the update for 154. Excitingly, this swarm was closed successfully last week. The last two big issues that we solved were support for Web3 filters and sync calls. And this means that our exit criteria and success metrics now passed. It means that every single DApp in our curated DApp list actually works in site status. Previously, there were quite a few broken experiences, but now you should be able to load all DApps, log in, make transactions, and take any sort of critical action that you would want to take inside a DApp. But if you happen to run a DApp in the browser and run into any issues, we would really appreciate it if you would report that. So that's the update for 154. We can move on. 101 extensions. This swarm was actually put on pause as we narrowed our focus in on the beta. But Julian did complete the first half of an MVP, and you can see a really simple demo of an extension being loaded from IPFS in the browser if you click on that link. I think I'll go a little rogue here because Julian actually did help us make some serious improvements to DApps that aren't covered by this slide or this swarm. So there were firstly a few UX improvements, minor UX improvements, but also we fixed a bug that was preventing some DApp transactions from being signed successfully. And we also, Julian created a variable that would allow DApps to identify status as a host. So that means that when a user is making a transaction inside another DApp, that DApp would be able to present a status logo to the user instead of a MetaMask logo, which is kind of the default standard out there today, even if it's not accurate. And then lastly, we were looking at some security issues, particularly just making sure that we could give users peace of mind that when they use the status browser, they are actually on secure sites and that they aren't at risk of phishing attack. But we've got some more research to do into that issue.
Cool. All right. Now research swarms. This is where the fun starts. Jacek, do you want to give an update on the conference?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I had the pleasure to go to the Swarm conference in Ljubljana a few weeks back. Big thanks to the organizers. They did a really great job, not just great talks, but also like a really warm reception, great team, fun people. Yeah, lots of excitement going on. They're releasing their POC 3, which contains a whole bunch of features which are interesting, encryption, all kinds of stuff, big network rewrite to make it more efficient. And they're working on the POC 4, which basically will mean more or less feature completeness in early next year sometime. And I mean, I can only say that I'm really, really excited about this development that's happening in that team. It's like it's one of the big missing components for Web3 applications, the ability to have your data out there, to access it in a decentralized manner without a single point of failure. So one of the things we're doing, we're looking at ways that we can help them out, and it might be that we'll be sending over some developers there as well to work on some of their features. Of particular interest to us at Status obviously are light clients, the ability to access it from a mobile device directly. Other points of interest or areas that we touched upon was the service compensation model. Now, I know Oscar has talked a little bit about this earlier, that in order for something like Status to survive beyond Status itself, we need to incentivize our community to provide service to people around there. And one really exciting thing on the Swarm conference that was presented was an implementation of the swap source window framework. Basically, a little bit similar to payment channels, but what's really nice about it is that it offers people a way to offer service on a network and get compensated for that. So instead of buying things for ETH, you can provide service, and this service, in the case of Swarm, is obviously storage. In the case of status, that could be, for example, running a mail server, or maybe running a dedicated Whisper node to sort of strengthen our network in ways like this. So I'm hoping to see lots of exciting developments in that area. They're working on a protocol called PSS. Basically, it's a combo of their particular form of routing and Whisper, which is already part of the Ethereum suite of protocols. What we can buy with that one is a little bit of messaging efficiency, perhaps at a cost to darkness and security, no, not really security, but darkness above all. And that is indeed a very interesting topic of conversation to have for the future. Like, how do we balance those two, and how to present them to users? Swarm itself as a storage, very exciting project. Obviously, there are also difficult questions that still need answering. One point is, in particular, is that you as a user, once you put data onto there's no real way of removing it from there. So it's sort of one of the things that would need a creative solution. Another thing is that the network is kind of geared towards data that doesn't change that often, or that doesn't need updating very often, and frequently updating data, such as, for example, a chat log, will also need some creative work in order to fit into that model. What else can I say about the conference? There were lots of other projects that presented their work there. Mainframe, decentralized chat application nowadays, development SDK for Ethereum DApps. There was EtherGit, a way to put your Git repos onto Swarm, which is really cool. I know a lot of projects right now have GitHub as this sort of central point of failure, and that works for many projects, but for others that maybe run afoul of US export laws or other problematic areas such as patents in the US, or maybe DMCA violating projects such as VLC, cannot really put their software onto GitHub. And EtherGit provides this model of sort of putting your Git repository on Swarm. But not only that, they're also offering a way to organize your community with, for example, push rules being negotiated on the chain, sort of like a DAO for open source projects and Git repos. Stream, another way of handling payments, this time through kind of like a subscription model where payments basically flow between projects instead of being microtransactions, having the high overhead of those. New cipher, public key re-encryption. So this is a possibility for somebody to delegate the possibility to re-encrypt data as a way of access control. So if a user wants to pass some data to somebody else, they can, instead of negotiating keys, they ask a service to re-encrypt the data using that user's public key. And this could, for example, be a way to solve group chat, because you re-encrypt the data using this re-encryption framework. There were lots of other projects there. I can't mention them all. I really encourage you to check out their conference webpage. They've promised to put up videos of all the talks. Yeah, I can't wait to hear more from them.
Awesome. That's Jacek. Are you also going to give a NIM update or someone else?
That should be me.
Oh, hey, Larry.
All right, hi. The most interesting news this week was that we've started our first test of our networking code by pairing Nimbus with the other Go clients, such as Get. We are exchanging few messages from the Ethereum wire protocol, and some issues were discovered along the way and fixed. And while this is a relatively trivial achievement so far, it kind of gives us a little bit of confidence that our RLP encoding code, our encryption scheme for the network communication are implemented correctly. Another progress we've made is that now most of the Ethereum virtual machine is based on, actually all of it is based on the new big integers library that we developed for NIM. And the result is that we are passing now 96% of all arithmetic tests and 100% of all bitwise tests in the VM. While this sounds good, we are still far from having a fully working VM because we haven't started work on working on tests that involve complicated control flow or state management. So that's what we'll be focusing in the coming weeks. We also have made progress on kind of a problem in question that was troubling us for a lot of time. When you develop software that has to deal with money, obviously error handling has to be taken very seriously. And so we had a lot of discussion within our team. We did a lot of research and soul seeking about what would be the best practices that we can adopt. And in the end, we have now settled on an architecture that we are plan to apply across the whole projects. And we are kind of like, our solution is probably quite interesting, it's quite novel and will probably be interesting to the entire NIM community. So we plan to publish a little bit more information about it in the future, probably as an RFC document in the GitHub tracker of NIM. And finally, we have started work on improved asynchronous event loop for NIM. Basically, we aim to increase the performance and the power efficiency of the asynchronous networking code. In the coming weeks, to meet our OKR goals, the most important next step will be to focus on the state database of Nimbus and integrating the Patricia trees and the a local database so that we can start working on implementing the first blockchain sync algorithms, which will be the fasting mode of Get. So that's it for me.
Sweet.
The lesson we learned so far is that pretty much everything we frequently stumble on some issues that has to be worked and fixed upstream in the NIM compiler itself or the standards library.
Cool. All right. Desktop.
Can I just throw in a quick comment there? One last thing, and this one goes out to the NIM community, really, which is that we're very excited working with NIM, and we're looking for more hands on deck there. So, you know, any NIM programs out there, anybody that's curious about NIM and curious about languages in general, give us a shout out.
All right. Cheeky hiring shout out there. All right, Jacek. Desktop. Max?
Hello. macOS bundle creation process is automated with a bash script, verified possibility to create portable distributions for Windows operating systems. Qt WebKit is used for Qt MinGW-based toolchain on Windows to support React Native WebView components. And future goals, resolve failing jest unit tests, this issue appeared after recent upgrade of React Native version, and also provide ongoing support of status IAM desktop application. That's all from us.
Cool. And then now we've got this awesome desktop team that's done a really solid job in the past 10 days of kind of getting everything together. Vital, you want to give an update?
Hi guys, yes. So we've had a kickoff meeting a bit less than 2 weeks ago. We had a quick run through the app, installed it, both for QA and dev guys, have nailed out some of the sharp corners during the local dev environment setups. The huge thanks to Max for helping this out. We have already had some success in basically shaping up what we want to do in the next 6 weeks. Have defined the use cases, our QA guys, Nastya and Tatiana. We have quite a formidable list of high priority issues to deal with that we have just begun starting looking into. And the goal for the next 2 weeks would be to finalize a list of those use cases that we want to be included in the beta, both use cases and the issues that have to be fixed till the end of Q2. We'd also want to set up some CI harnesses and set up some infrastructure with regards to Jenkins CI builds, because right now we are still building them ad hoc, still building the packages for macOS and Ubuntu ad hoc. And the priority for the development team would be some high priority bugs that have been already put in our GitHub project by Nastya and Tatiana. These would be also dealt with during the next 2 weeks. We've already had some successes already. Volodymyr have fixed some of the nailing issues, gnawing issues like the inability to copy and paste the public key from within the application, and also some issues with regards to the enter key not working in the chat window. So yeah, I think we have already kind of loaded the fuel into the rocket engines, and we're already in the air. So yeah, hopefully we'll reach our destination.
Awesome. So yeah, the one thing to highlight, so the goal for the team is that by the end of the quarter, the entire desktop team will be using Status to communicate with each other. And then through the course of Q3, more and more teams, with the goal that by the end of Q3, all of Status and all our channels, including Riot and everything, will be replaced by Slack. Let's see how we go, but it's a very exciting and ambitious target. Cool. All right, that wraps us up. We're slightly over schedule, but that's okay. Apologies to other teams that have meetings. I know the Embarked folks are running 15 minutes late because of this. There is one question that's come through, and Jarrad, I don't know if you want to take a stab at it, around balancing between quality of product development versus community engagement, which is, in my opinion, is a bit of a false dichotomy, but I'll let Jarrad kind of answer.
Yeah, I gave us our response to this in the Catalyst channel. It's certainly a good question. It's similar to another question, how we avoid things like the Bodie McBoatface scenario. For those who don't know, there was some submarine or something like that that was put out for community naming, and the most voted thing was Bodie McBoatface. You could argue that maybe that's not the highest quality sort of outcome. For me, there's a few different approaches. I think the softest approach is about creating a strong culture or a strong tradition or a social norm of quality. So this idea of everyone who's involved already wants the sort of best outcome, rather than doing things for the lols. I think this is great because it is the most flexible, and it allows things allows us to not take things entirely so seriously all the time, and it certainly allows you to get this like perfect. This is a very snug market fit. It's also the hardest to get right because social ontology is more of an art than a science. But you know, it's worth a try. I haven't really found any like really hard resources on how to go about that. If it's on the software side, well, I mean, maintainers are still somewhat gatekeepers, and there is inherent trust and reputation involved in that. Like, you're not going to become a maintainer unless we can trust you with managing the code base. And things get reviewed by them. Of course, reviewing is quite costly, so there needs to be some kind of form of compensation from that, and maybe there's some kind of multi-tiered screening system to make sure that people aren't getting over-encumbered with just useless, quote unquote, useless pull requests, so to speak. And I mean, the other side is that like S&T voting, there are large stakeholders, including the status organization, that could help direct and guide this in the sort of short term. Of course, we want to, we are a bootstrap, so the idea is that we disseminate or dissolve our stake in this to give it over to the users themselves. So yeah, I think there's definitely some things that you can do to help influence this, whether or not it's ultimately the best. I guess that's part of the fun to find out. And communication.
So one of the last questions was the goal on desktop to have Riot and Slack channels migrated to status by end of Q3. I don't want to speak on behalf of the team, and that probably is a little bit too aggressive, but I think it's definitely, we will be close to that. So by the end of Q2, the desktop team will all be communicating on status. That's the goal. And then as many teams as possible. And if not, everything moves on by the end of Q3. So let's see how Q2 goes, but that will be an awesome achievement if we're able to get there.
It'd certainly be an awesome achievement. I think it's dangerous to make any sort of large claims like that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, on that note, thanks everyone for joining in for our 9th town hall. We went a little bit over, but yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.